There comes a time in life when you realize that everything you were taught about how reality works ... was incomplete. And maybe that's exactly what you're feeling right now. Because if you stopped at this video, it's not a coincidence. It's not chance. It's as if the universe decided that today ... you would remember something that your soul already knew, but your mind had forgotten. Napoleon Hill said that everything begins with a thought, but not just any thought. A thought imbued with burning desire, with faith, with a conviction so powerful that it leaves no room for doubt. And that's where the shock begins. Because if that's true, then why have you spent your whole life hearing that everything depends on time, luck, or even something outside of you? There is a code that is not hidden. It has always been before your eyes, written, repeated, declared. But few realize it, and they don't realize it. Not because it is difficult, complex, or mysterious. They don't realize it because this code is a direct threat to the invisible structure that sustains the world as it is. If every human being knew this, they would understand that there are no limits imposed on them other than those we accept as truth. Napoleon Hill discovered this when he studied the greatest geniuses, millionaires, and visionaries in history. They had nothing extraordinary in physical or intellectual terms. What they had was a visceral understanding of how reality responds. What if I told you that the Bible not only confirms this, but delivers this code directly, clearly, unequivocally? It's there, it's written, and no, it's not hidden between the lines, nor reserved for theologians, nor disguised in metaphors. It's so wide open that most people simply don't see it, because the world has taught you to look outside, to seek outside, to wait for something external to validate you, save you, free you, allow you. And this is the most subtle prison that exists. A prison without bars, but with internal limits, invisible but real limits. And the code that I'm going to reveal to you ... breaks that, disrupts that, destroys that ... How many times have you asked yourself, in the silence of your own thoughts, why some people seem to live a life where everything flows ... while others, even though they are good, fair, and fearful, spend decades fighting, waiting, and getting frustrated? Napoleon Hill dedicated decades to understanding this mystery, and his conclusion was devastating. The world does not respond to what you want. The world responds to what you are, and you are not what you say you are. You are what you feel, believe, vibrate, and transmit. And this is not spiritual talk. This is applied physics. This is cellular biology. This is neuroscience. But, above all, this is spirituality in its purest form. You know that moment when you pray, ask, cry out, and it seems like nothing happens? You know that moment when you wonder if God has forgotten you? Well, Hill would say that this is not a spiritual problem. It is a problem of alignment, of frequency, of identity. Because the Creator does not react to your desperation. He does not respond to your plea. He responds ... to your certainty, to your vibration, to your state of being. And this ... is written, not in self-help books, not in motivational speeches. It is in the Bible. It is recorded in Romans 4:17. But before I give you this password, you need to be ready to understand what it really means, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Napoleon Hill observed something fascinating about the men and women he studied. None of them waited. None of them asked permission. None of them depended on circumstances. They simply decided. They assumed an identity before external evidence confirmed that identity. They behaved as if they already had it. Long before they had it, they spoke as if they already were ... long before they were. And inevitably, the physical world had no choice but to obey. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Because everything you've been taught since you were a child is exactly the opposite. That you have to earn it, that you have to wait, that you have to prove yourself, suffer, sacrifice yourself. That God, one day, in His infinite goodness, might look at you and decide to bless you. But what if that was never true? What if God Himself never said that? What if ... all along, He was telling you exactly the opposite? What if ... all along, the universe was asking you, why are you waiting, when everything has already been given to you? The problem is not God, it never was. The problem is your mental software. It is the invisible programs that you carry, inherited from your family, your culture, your religion, your society. Programs that trained you to be an effect, never a cause. Programs that taught you to react, never to create. And this code This key, this verse, explodes these programs. Because once activated, there is no going back. You will never be the same person again. Because you will understand that you are not a victim of the world. You are an author. You are a co-creator. You are a living extension of the Creator. Napoleon Hill said that desire is the starting point of all achievement. But not just any desire. A desire burns, it blazes. A desire that merges with faith until it becomes a creative obsession. A conviction so deep that the entire universe bends. And when that conviction takes hold, when that identity takes hold, the invisible begins to give way. Doors that once seemed locked, simply open because they were never locked. They were just waiting for you to discover that. The key was always in your hands. But here's the most disconcerting detail of all. Most people will never access this. Not because they can't, but because they are so attached to their old identity that they prefer to believe they are victims of life, of fate, of God, of the economy, of the government, of their family. They prefer to believe they have no power, because to believe they do would require taking full responsibility for their own lives, and that is scary. That is painful. That is ego-destroying. So I ask you, looking into your eyes, reaching through this screen, touching not your ears but your deepest consciousness, are you ready? Are you truly ready to discover that the life you want is not in the future? It is now here in the unseen, waiting, not for time, not for luck, not for God, waiting for you. Because when I reveal to you what is written in Romans 4:17, everything changes, and if you have the courage to live it, then impossible will become just another word you used before you remembered who you are. Are you ready? You know that moment when you realize that everything that seemed complex, distant, almost mystical, has actually always been right before your eyes. It's as if you suddenly realized that the secret of life was never hidden. It was simply encoded in a language that few have been trained to decipher. And this is exactly where the journey deepens. Because if in the first part you realized that there is a code, now you will understand how this code operates. And get ready, because this is not a pretty theory. It is not a motivational concept. This is applied spiritual engineering. It is the operating manual of creation, of the universe and, above all, of your own life. And yes, it is written in the Bible. And yes, Napoleon Hill spent his entire life trying to shout this to whoever had ears to hear. Imagine an architect. He looks at an empty lot. There is nothing there, no walls, no structures, nothing that his eyes can see. But inside his mind, there is already an entire house. He sees the rooms, he sees the windows, he sees the colors, he even sees the details that no one else can imagine. And then he starts talking about it. He says, this will be the front door, this will be the living room, this will be the balcony. To the listener, this may seem crazy. After all, there is nothing there. But to him, it is absolutely real. And sooner or later, that void bends. Matter obeys. The house appears, and what was previously invisible, is now tangible. This is exactly the logic of the verse in Romans 4:17. God calls those things that are not, as though they were. This is not a spiritual metaphor. This is not biblical poetry. This is the modus operandi of creation. This is literally how God manifests reality. And more than that, it is an invitation for you, made in His image and likeness, to operate in the same way. Napoleon Hill understood this so profoundly that he built his entire work on this principle. For him, thought, when mixed with burning desire, faith and persistence, becomes matter. It becomes reality. But here is the key that few understand. It is not enough to think. It is not enough to wish. It is not enough to repeat empty affirmations. You have to mix that thought with an emotional frequency, a vibration, an internal state that declares to the universe, this is mine. And when that happens, something invisible begins to move. The quantum field begins to rearrange itself. Circumstances that once seemed like insurmountable obstacles begin to bend. Money appears. The right people appear. Doors open. But not because you asked, not because you begged, but because you called, because you declared, because you aligned yourself with the identity of the one who already has it. It seems like magic, but it isn't. It's physics. It's applied spirituality. And science already knows this. Bruce Lipton, a neuroscientist, proved that the cells in our body respond not only to chemistry, but mainly to the vibrational environment. Joe Dispenza demonstrates in his studies how the brain, when trained, does not distinguish what is real from what is imagined. In other words, if you live an internal experience with emotion, for your body, for your brain, that is already real, and if it is real internally, sooner or later, it needs to manifest externally. Juliana's story is a perfect example of this. She grew up hearing that she needed to wait for God's timing, that she needed to deserve it, that it wasn't right to desire too much. That humility meant accepting too little, but something inside her always screamed louder. She knew, deep down, that there was something wrong with that speech. Until one day, she heard this verse from Romans in a way she had never heard before. It didn't just enter her mind, it entered her soul. That night, she decided, from today on, I live as someone who already has. I no longer ask, I declare. I no longer expect, I act. 2 months later, her life took a turn she never imagined. She set up her own company, attracted clients she didn't even know existed, and, for the first time, felt like she was living in the flow, in the field, on the axis of what already is. But don't think it was luck. It wasn't a miracle in the religious sense, it was alignment. It was her behaving like someone who already had it, even before she had it. And that's the part that most people don't want to hear, because it requires a radical change of identity, and changing identity ... hurts, because it means leaving behind the old self. It means giving up excuses. It means stopping seeing yourself as a victim. And let's face it, being a victim is a certain comfort. It gives the illusion that it's not your responsibility, but the truth is hard and liberating at the same time. If you don't have what you want, it's because, on some level, you haven't become the person who has it. Napoleon Hill knew this. That's why, in all his lectures, he insisted, the first step is to clearly define what you want. The second is to believe it so strongly that there is no room for doubt. And the third is to live as if it already is. And, mind you, this does not mean ignoring reality. It means not being a slave to it. It means understanding that the current reality is not the cause, it is the effect. And that, if you want to change the effect, it is not the effect that you change, it is the cause. It is the invisible. It is the vibrational field. You know that person who is always saying that it is difficult, that he has no money, that he is always sick, that nothing is going right. Well, that is true. He doesn't realize it, but he is constantly calling this reality. He is declaring, without knowing it, that this is true for him. And the universe, which does not distinguish between a joke and truth, only responds, of course, thy will be done. Because reality does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you believe to be true. And here comes the most disconcerting part of all. Because what it means is that, if you start living like someone you already have, even without external evidence, something starts to fall into place. You start to think differently. You start to talk differently. You start to walk differently. You start to make different decisions. And those decisions create new results. And those results feed back into your new identity. And suddenly, what seemed impossible becomes inevitable. But I know what you may be thinking right now. What if I do this and nothing happens? And here is the question that separates those who manifest from those who never manifest. Because only those who truly do not yet understand the principle ask this question. Those who ask this are testing. They are doubting. They are setting the vibration on it is not yet. And the universe, like a perfect mirror, answers exactly that. It is not yet. That's why Napoleon Hill said that faith is not hope. It is not optimism. Faith is certainty. Faith is conviction. Faith is living in what is, even if everything around you screams that it is not. Faith is walking in the invisible, with the same certainty as someone walking on concrete. Faith is talking to the invisible, knowing that it listens, knowing that it responds, knowing that it obeys. Carlos is another example of this. An entrepreneur who, during the pandemic, saw his company collapse. Everything fell apart. Contracts were cancelled. Employees were laid off. Debts piled up. But instead of going into despair mode, he did something that seemed insane. He started waking up every day at 6 in the morning, getting dressed as if he were going to a business meeting, sitting in the living room and declaring out loud, "Thank you, God, that my company is thriving. Thank you, that my customers are back. Thank you, that everything is flowing." For weeks, there was no sign, no proof that this was working. But internally, he already knew. He could feel it. It was over. And then, It happened. A former client called, then another, and, within a few months, his new company was making 5 times more money than before. Is this coincidence? Is this luck? Is this a miracle? No. This is law. This is Romans 4:17 in action. This is Napoleon Hill incarnate. This is the manifestation of that which has always been available, but which only responds to those who have the courage to live on the frequency of the already is. And now, the question that won't go away, and you, will you continue describing what you see, or will you start declaring what you choose to live? Will you continue reacting to the visible, or will you start shaping the invisible? Because, from now on, you can no longer pretend you don't know. You can no longer hide in the illusion of waiting, because now you carry the manual. You know how God manifests, and, more importantly, you know that you were made to manifest in the same way. And from now on, what do you choose to call it? Napoleon Hill, in his studies, collected hundreds of testimonies of men and women who transformed their lives by rigorously applying this principle. And the Bible, in the same way, is a book of living records of manifestations through active faith. Eliane, when she chose to no longer wait, but to live as one who already has, activated this same law that Hill would call creative autosuggestion. She understood that it is not about waiting for the world to change, but about changing the inner world. And then, as always happens, the external world had no choice. It bowed. Anderson, Carlos, Mara, they are all expressions of the same spiritual phenomenon described by both Hill and Paul in Romans. You do not manifest what you want, you manifest what is. Hill warned, the subconscious does not distinguish reality from what is held as belief. And here is the key. If you live as someone who expects, the universe can only deliver more. Expects. But if you live as someone who already is, then get ready, because the invisible begins to bend to your vibration. But how far are you willing to carry this responsibility? There is a point in space-time where the old you must die, so that the new you can be born. Napoleon Hill called this place a revocable decision, where there is no turning back, where you cross the bridge of uncertainty, to live in the territory of absolute faith. It is the space where burning desire, fused with faith, no longer asks, will it happen, but states with conviction, it already happened. Romans 4:17 is the divine confirmation of this universal principle. God calls what is not as though it were, and the one who was made in his image and likeness was made for exactly that, to call, not to wait, to decree, not to doubt. Hill said that faith is not a feeling. It is a mental and spiritual decision sustained until the invisible gives way. And here arises the question that separates seekers from co-creators. Are you willing to cross that bridge? Because on the other side, your old life simply doesn't exist anymore. Napoleon Hill never taught people to be rich. He taught them to remember who they are and who are they. Heirs.co-authors of creation, fragments of the Creator himself. The verse leaves no doubt. God does not wait for signs. God creates signs. God does not react. God activates. And if you are made in his image, then your job is not to wait, but to call. Hill stated, you will never get more than you believe you deserve. And here is where thousands fail. They carry an identity of orphan, of spiritual beggar, of someone who needs to convince life to be good. But life does not respond to supplications. It responds to vibrations. It responds to those who position themselves as heirs, as someone who does not ask, but claims. And if you truly believed that everything is already yours, how would you behave? How would you pray? How would you walk the streets? What would change? If he stopped being the one who asks today, and became the one who calls, and now, there is no more room for ignorance. You know, and once you know, there is no more unknowing. Napoleon Hill ends his masterpiece, Think and Grow Rich, saying that there is an invisible force that responds to organized thought, guided by faith and sustained by decision. Romans 4:17 does not say something different. It says exactly the same, in language that transcends the centuries. God calls those things which are not as though they were. This is the decree. This is the map. This is the blueprint for divine and human operation. Because if God made you in his image, it was not to observe miracles. It was to be the miracle in motion. From this point on, you are no longer someone who reads promises. You are the one who has become the promise incarnate. And when your voice aligns with the sound of heaven, the universe has no choice but to obey, because now you are no longer the one who waits. You are the one who calls, and the one who calls sees.